Welcome to the Mental Health Takeaways podcast, the male mental health podcast that's trying to make the subject of male mental health a bit more engaging so that more men will actually engage in this conversation. This is part 2 of our episode featuring Cassie. In part 1, she tells us how her husband decided about 10 years ago that, as she phrased it, life was no longer for him. And she's been really brave in telling us a bit more about their life together and her life since that event. In this episode, the guest Cassie and my co-host Brad gang up on me when they say I interrupt too much.
I can't let that go. I can't let that go, Cassie.
What have I said that Cassie's laughing at?
On your courses, you're there to listen to somebody, and then just when you think you've got something to say, you don't. Blah. And yet on here.
I'm not delivering a course now. No one's paying me for this. I can talk whenever I want.
This is what it is. This is what I have to put up with.
We get to hear what advice Cassie would pass on to anyone who is supporting somebody who they know is having suicidal thoughts and feelings.
I think you have to accept that you can't control them, and all you can ever do is to try to offer support and a listening ear if they want to talk. But I think making yourself as available to them, and 3 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning is a horrible time actually to be having to have conversations. You know, if someone's seriously at that point, or you're worried that someone's at that point, if it's 3 o'clock in the morning or 4 o'clock in the morning, then it's creating that space, and if you can, to be there and to let them know that they're not alone and that they are supported.
And we hear Cassie's advice to her 18-year-old self, which I bring back as one of my takeaways at the end. I'm not going to tell you what that is now, but I have not been able to stop thinking about it ever since Cassie said it. So here we go. We're going to resume Cassie's episode, part 2, with Brad talking about other people's reactions to somebody who's been bereaved by suicide.
And I wonder if, because when we spoke the other night, we almost talked about the whispers, didn't we? Which again just seems to be a big part of this, and why it's so valuable that you've come on to talk about this, because I think that's almost highlighted in the reactions of the people around you as well, because this is such a taboo subject that, you know, nobody openly wants to talk about. Well, how on earth is somebody that's struggling with thoughts like that supposed to go and approach somebody if nobody that is around them is willing to talk about it? And you know, again, so it's massive that you're coming on to talk about it, because people don't understand, and unless you've been directly involved or impacted in that scenario, of course we don't know what to say. So I think just the more that we can communicate about it, and for you to put out like, yeah, because some person said this to me, and like, that's ridiculous, and another person said this, like, because people just don't know, do they? They don't want to talk about it, and yet everyone can often have an opinion, which isn't very helpful. But yeah, we just need people to be upfront, honest, and talk, don't we?
You mean, yeah, and I mean, the other really one that I found very unhelpful was that there was some ethereal being who had somehow done this on purpose because he or she had a plan. And you think, I genuinely don't understand why some celestial being who's done this deliberately to me and to him is why that's going to be of any comfort to me in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
But I do think that people. To look at it from the flip side, I also do think that people are genuinely, mostly, fairly well-meaning, fairly well-intentioned, but they get it really badly wrong because they just don't know. And I think that where, some people, I think, their reactions are peculiar for the sake of being peculiar. But I think mostly the people that really wound me up at the outset were actually, in fairness, probably just doing their best to try and help. But from my perspective, because they had no idea how to approach it, they got it really badly wrong. And I found that incredibly aggravating at the time because it was genuinely unhelpful. But I don't think that they were, I think it was a bit sad because because you don't have these, we don't have these conversations, and there is no kind of rule book. If this has happened, then actually these are the 5 things that are likely to be the most helpful to that person in that situation. And certainly 10 years ago, I don't, when did Instagram start? I mean, now you can kind of look at Instagram and there'll be a post on, on what you should say. But, back then, I don't think that it was that easy. And, I think it would be unfair to say that these people were trying to do harm, but
Yeah.
it didn't work.
Were there any networks around you at that time? I'm assuming there are lots of networks around that sort of thing now, but were you able to kind of contact people or grow a support network of people who have experienced the same? Or was it just purely like friends who are trying their best, but maybe putting their foot in their mouths?
I think, yeah. I mean, even then you could. There's an organisation called Widowed and Young.
Yeah, I've just written that down.
Which I was invited to, and I didn't go anywhere near, because I think at the time I wasn't sure that I wanted to sort of mire myself in the midst of a lot of other people's experiences as well. I think I kind of wanted to get to the end of get it straight in my own mind before I then involve myself with other people. And there are a couple of Facebook groups that I joined that I'm actually still a member of. There's one called I think it's the Brave Ladies Club, and which is specifically female survivors of suicide. The other one is Widower Humour, which. And neither of you would be allowed admittance to either of these groups, fortunately. The other one is full of incredibly dark and inappropriate humour, most of which comes from Americans. But it is genuinely light relief. And sometimes you just read this sort of thing and you think, oh, okay, maybe I'm all right.
Interesting to know that those support networks are out there. One of the things I was just going to rewind back to is how society and people in general are still in that mindset of not knowing what to say. I come at this from a mental health first aid point of view, and I'm a mental health first aid instructor. And people often come onto my courses and think they're going to learn like a spell, and they can put this spell on people and that the words they say will make somebody feel better. Whereas actually the second part of the action plan of being a mental health first aider is listen. It's not talk. It's not say anything. It's just give space for the person to talk. And then when you think, oh, I'll come in there, don't. See if you can just encourage the next bit of talking and the next bit of talking. When the person's ready, of course, not just poking them, going, speak, speak, speak. But that's, I think, a really important message to put out there to the listeners, that actually often it's not saying anything. It's the absence of saying anything that can help someone. It can be like, just sit back, just use your ears and steady your mouth.
I can't let that go. I can't let that go, Cassie.
What have I said that Cassie's laughing at?
On your courses, you're there to listen to somebody, and then just when you think you've got something to say, you don't. Blah. And yet on here,
I'm not delivering a course now. No one's paying me for this. I can talk whenever I want.
It's what it is. It's what I have to put up with, and it's obviously getting it out of your system. Well, on that note, I'm going to go back to something that I'm really curious about, Cassie, before my friend and colleague interrupted you, because you'd started to talk about the role of a woman before Matt sort of put us onto the would you rathers, and I'm just keen to know where you were going to go with that, and hopefully we've not moved on too far.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. When we were talking the other day, I would describe myself as feminist, but for me, feminist means equality across the board, and that's not, I expect to be paid equally for what I do, but I also think that it extends to enabling and allowing space for men to be vulnerable and to express their insecurities, and to be afforded the ability to talk and to be honest, and not to have to feel as though they must be the invincible provider, the alpha male, every moment of every single day. And, I think probably a lot of men quite like to have an element of that about them. But I think that women have a role to play, and I think it's an important role in enabling, providing that space and that acceptance and patience to the men in their lives to let them have those conversations and to make that okay. And I think that that's, again, is, that it's another facet of the equality that I think feminism should be all about. And I think that that's something that's a conversation that probably isn't had enough, and maybe we don't take as much responsibility for that as we should, because I've had friends sort of say, oh my goodness, he was really upset and he cried and I didn't know what to do with him. And it's like, that's your fella. Did that really make you feel so uncomfortable that you couldn't cope when he was expressing an emotion that you didn't see as being masculine somehow? Because I think that we've got a role to play in helping men realize that actually it really is okay, and we still do find them attractive if they are able to show emotion. I think it's a strength to be able to show emotion, but I'm aware that isn't necessarily where people tend to go with it. And I think, as women, we've got such a huge role to play because we're 50% of the population. And we can, if we all pulled together and sort of said to our the men in our lives, look, this is actually fine, would that not make a massive difference? I mean, how would that make a man feel if they were feeling vulnerable and they're with their partner or their sister or their, whoever it is, and they're saying, do you know what, this is absolutely completely fine. Pour your heart out. Go for it.
I vehemently agree. And it leads directly into the positive would you rather that I said it did, and that I emailed to Brad and that he didn't read or pay attention to. Can you sense the friction between us?
You're like a married couple,
Cassie.
you are, honestly.
Right, here's your positive would you rather. But we've covered a lot of it. But I haven't addressed women in this specifically. I've referred to society rather than women. But you have, would you rather have a magic wand which can either make men better at talking about their mental health, or society better at listening to men talk about their mental health? If you could only do one.
The latter.
Okay.
Because if you don't do that, if you don't have that, then men can talk for all they're worth, but they're talking into a vacuum and into just a brick wall of nothingness, aren't they? So you have to have the acceptance first, which then encourages them to talk, or at least the ones that want to talk would have a willing audience. But if you've got a society that doesn't accept and doesn't want to listen, then men can talk all they like, but they're just talking into a void, aren't they?
I mean, I think it's interesting that often, let's take this really hot topic at the moment because the government brought in a law around misogyny. And I think it's really interesting to look at, well, whose problem is misogyny? Well, it affects women, but it's not women's problem per se. It's men that need to change their behaviours towards women, if you see what I mean. So to address that problem, you need to get into the misogynistic men. But male mental health still seems to be a little bit, not victim blaming, but that whole idea of, well, male mental health isn't where it should be, let's address the men. Whereas, well, actually, no, what you've just said about society getting better at listening, and I really broadly mean society, not just women. So I can help a man with his mental health by being better at listening to him. So I need to improve in that area. But so does the rest of society. So I don't think it's good to see it just as a male problem. So let's target all the initiatives at men. It's a societal problem. Let's target the initiatives at society rather than at men. That's my take on it.
And I think that the where change is needed, the change is different. So women can be a bit more accepting of those things that may be seen, and I think traditionally are seen as not being quite as masculine, perhaps, although I don't necessarily agree with that. whereas men, there's this kind of, male friendships are sort of stereotypically down the pub watching the football with a pint in hand and a load of sort of piss-taking banter.
Yeah.
So there's a change needed, but the change is different for each.
And the change that I dream of, mental health takeaways, is supposed to be about little natty tips and tricks that someone can apply in their life the next day. But I'm talking about huge societal mind shifts. But the change that I dream of is splitting feminine from female and masculine from male, because I think they're linked at the moment. And that to suggest that a man is in any way female is emasculating and damaging. Well, not damaging to him, but he would perceive that as unwelcome commentary. However, feminine is different to female, and that whenever anybody tells me you're great at caring for your kids, that fills me up. I feel amazing when someone says, God, aren't you lovely with your kids? Don't you really care for them? Don't you nurture them? Like, I love that. But that is obviously a feminine trait. It's not the same as a female trait. It's a feminine trait. And I feel great when someone points out that, gosh, they really trust you, or they really, you can really see that you look after them. And I think we need more of that kind of separation, that aren't you good at expressing your emotions? Aren't you good at supporting other people when they're expressing their emotions? And taking those traditionally feminine roles and saying they're not female, they're feminine, and it's good that when men can do those feminine things.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I wouldn't necessarily say childcare is a feminine trait. I would say that actually a man who is able to show that love and care and to be a good parent, I think is I would class as an attractive masculine trait.
And I tell you what, if we could get someone like you to then also say that you think being able to share your thoughts and feelings is also an attractive masculine trait, I think we're working towards changing how people think of it.
And the thing is that I think it is, but I think that I'm probably in the minority.
Sadly, yeah.
Because I do think that actually the ability to be, I don't necessarily see the ability for a bloke to be open and honest about his feelings as being particularly feminine or sort of feminizing that person. I think that it's actually more. I think personally, I think I find people that can talk about their feelings more attractive, more engaging, certainly, than people who can't. But I don't necessarily think that I would consider it that a man were feminized or it would be any sort of negative if they could do that. But I think I am I think I'm in the minority there.
Yeah, I wonder where the change will come and when it will come. But
I don't know, but I don't recommend having to go through my backstory to get there. That would
of course not. It's unfortunate that you've had to go through your backstory in order to be there. What's the phrase I've heard? That life is too short to not learn from other people's mistakes. So that's exactly what we're doing with the podcast, isn't it? That we're trying to get people to learn from your experiences without having to have your experiences. That's the key to it.
So, Cassie, we're just going to come to an opportunity for you to reflect, speak to yourself, both in past and in future, with a couple of subtle changes for what is our special episode. So my first question for you is, you've got 1 minute, okay, with 18-year-old you. They're about to come in the room, and you've got 1 minute with them. What advice would you give to 18-year-old you?
Follow your gut, I think, would be a really big one. Trust your gut, because your instincts are actually more right than you know they are. I think that would probably be that would be the headline.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not convinced that I would advise my 18-year-old self to do anything differently. I think I would advise my 18-year-old self to have a bit of faith in seeing where the journey goes, rather than necessarily expecting to get to enjoy the journey, I suppose, rather than just looking at the destination. Because for reasons other than just this one, my life's taken some slightly unexpected turns here and there, career wise, family wise, etc., etc. And I think that all of those experiences make you who you are, and they all add to what you become, and how you feel about things, and the stories you have to tell. And I think that you just have to enjoy the days as they come, and not spend too much time worrying about where you're heading and what you're doing, and what the end goal actually is, because actually you miss a load of stuff along the way otherwise.
It's such good advice, isn't it? And it's something I find myself talking about a lot with clients, about just that being in the moment, and when we spend a lot of our time worrying about what's happened in the past, that can be a pretty dark place. If we spend a lot of our time worrying about what might happen in the future, that's also a pretty dark place. But when we take stock and just, look at what's around us and what's good and everything that's there to be enjoyed, it's good. Okay, we're going to take a slight.
One more thing. Take loads of photographs. Photograph everything. Photograph everyone, and just, even if they're not doing anything in particular, just photograph them. Because I think that would be the other thing I'd tell 18-year-old me.
That's lovely advice.
Yeah. As someone who's partial to it, I'm regularly having to clear my phone because it's just full. I love taking a photograph. Is that something you do more of now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I never
cool.
Never used to. And now, I mean, my camera roll is just a mess of random pictures of random people, and it's all people.
Yeah.
But I will take pictures of whatever the kids are doing, and there are pictures of it. Whatever my friends are doing, there are pictures of it.
Yeah,
they don't go
cool.
on Instagram because they're not for any purpose. They're not for parade. They're just for me.
Just capturing moments. I like it. Okay, well, before you get to meet 80-year-old you, I've got a couple of specific ones for this special. So, again, going down the advice route, is there any advice that you think of that you could give to someone who is worried about a loved one who may be having suicidal thoughts or ideations?
I think that all you can ever do, because you can't ever, I think you have to accept that you can't control them, and all you can ever do is to try to offer support and a listening ear to them if they want to talk. But I think making yourself as available to them, and 3:00 in the morning, 4:00 in the morning is a horrible time actually to be having to have conversations. But if someone's seriously at that point, or you're worried that someone's at that point, if it's 3:00 in the morning or 4:00 in the morning, then it's creating that space, and if you can, to be there and to let them know that they're not alone and that they are supported, but also to remember that there's only so much that you're ever going to be able to do, I think.
Yeah.
And you have to try not to take so much on yourself that you risk yourself. I mean, there's that kind of, in a plane, you put your own mask on before you help other people. And I think that that's important as well when you're dealing with someone who has really serious issues, because you can't fill somebody else's cup if yours is empty.
Yeah. And I love that you've given that balanced view, actually. about looking after yourself as well as trying to help that person as well.
Yeah, all I was going to say was that I think from within the mental health world, but from outside of somebody who has been directly affected by suicide. I have lost one friend and one family member, but they were far more distant than a spouse. But not being directly affected by suicide, you tend to hear the language that suicide is what they class as an avoidable death. And I question that every time I hear it, in that either every death is avoidable in some way, like we just haven't got the technology to make it that way, or deaths by suicide are not avoidable, and certainly not always avoidable. And the thing that comes to mind is I feel the same about that as when I watch the tennis. Now, bear with me. In that people playing against Novak Djokovic, they put up on telly their unforced errors. And I'm pretty sure if you're playing tennis against someone like Djokovic, you might think that's an unforced error, but you're playing Novak Djokovic. Like, everything's going to be difficult because you're playing Novak Djokovic. Those errors that they're saying are unforced and therefore, like, that's your fault you've made that error. Well, if you're playing someone as good as a ATP Tour player, there's going to be loads of what might be described as unforced errors, but they actually are forced errors because you're playing such a good player. And I think when it comes to death by suicide, actually, maybe those deaths aren't avoidable because you're dealing with such a hard thing, which is that level of mental ill health that is at that severe end of the scale, that actually means it's not avoidable. And actually, in some ways it can be, when all the initiatives and all the support and everything around that person is still there and still right, and it happens anyway. I think that goes to show that suicide isn't always an avoidable death. I wondered what you thought about that.
To be fair, I don't think I've ever heard it being called
Really?
Actually, that's something I've not come across. No, I mean, I think that's a really peculiar thing to say about it, actually, to be honest. I mean, that's like saying that a death by cancer's somehow
Avoidable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't that it doesn't follow, does it? If you have an illness that is untreatable by medication or other, other treatments, and you, whatever it is, there is no way to rid that person of it, then surely it is inevitable, not just not avoidable.
Yeah.
I'm a bit. Hang on a minute. Yeah, that doesn't make sense. I really don't.
And I think you're coming from a place of understanding what it actually, what the characteristics of it actually are. Whereas I think in the mental health world, frequently I hear it described as being avoidable death, and it's always grated with me, and I'm glad that we're addressing that.
Yeah,
because
that's actually literally making me feel uncomfortable.
Really,
I can feel myself sort of doing this a little bit. I don't like that. That almost sort of feels like it's apportioning blame and saying that there's a fault that lies with the person who has taken that route. That doesn't sit very well with me at all, actually.
It's one of many contradictions, I think, that, again, if you were to apportion blame and fault, then that's going to make people less likely to talk about it. And what we know about suicide is that the more people talk about it, the better their chances of accessing the support that could make a difference. Yeah. And I agree with you entirely that actually describing it in a way that could apportion blame would inhibit someone from talking about it.
Yeah, I think that's where I'm at. Again, a bit like Cassie, I'm like trying to get my head around it about what I make of that. But yeah, I think it just adds to the stigma of it because it's an avoidable death. It just, I don't know, it's the idea of choice, I think. Like, this was an option. They didn't have to choose that, but they did. And it's back to that scenario of the difference between a physical illness and a mental illness. And it's treating the two differently in my eyes.
And I was so just after, for a little while after it had all happened, my brain, I have quite logical, wired in a conventional sense brain, spent quite a lot of time thinking about it and trying to figure it out and trying to make sense of it and trying to understand and sort of trying to find some rational explanation for this. And it was actually my dad who said at one point, you know, he'd obviously been listening to me kind of talk around this for a little bit, and he said, "I think you need to stop." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "You are trying to make sense of something that by its very nature makes no sense."
Yes.
Because your brain and his brain were wired differently. That's not to say that one was wrong and one was right, but they were different. Because of the way you are wired, it would never, he said, I don't believe it would ever occur to you. It just wouldn't cross your mind to take, no matter how bad things got, it wouldn't cross your mind to do something like that. So he said, that being the case, you are never, ever going to be able to put yourself in his shoes, and you are never, ever going to understand. And you can't expect yourself to. And you're going to have to accept this and accept that you'll never know. And you're going to have to stop taking yourself round and round in circles trying to figure it out. And I think that that's where people who don't have their brains wired in a way that would take them down into those depths shouldn't maybe be commenting on whether these deaths are avoidable or not avoidable, because I certainly couldn't imagine ever being in that place or getting to that stage. And I think it's sort of, it feels very peculiar to me that someone who hasn't got that wiring would make that sort of comment. Does that make any sense? I don't know whether that's actually, it's an emerging thought, I'm afraid.
I think it's actually, to me, it stands out as really good advice, actually, in terms of that idea, because I think, you know, whenever anyone goes through any sort of trauma, it kind of kickstarts the part of our brain that goes to worst case scenario and obsessive and highly vigilant and looking out for things. And I think sometimes that can lead us down a really, really negative road. And for you to be able to have that conversation and kind of get that understanding, I imagine, was probably quite freeing. Just that idea of, actually, we can't understand everything, and we can't, can we? Like, our lived experience is our lived experience, and with all the will in the world, I don't know, I wouldn't experience it the same as you experienced it or as Matt experienced it. So I guess the focus has to be around, like what you talked about earlier, what do you need to do to get yourself back into a good place and being positive about the future, and also being at peace with the fact that actually there are some things about it that we just won't understand, and there's absolutely nothing we can do about that. That's what I took from what you were saying.
And actually, it was quite funny because I mentioned to you that after it had all happened, apparently your brain shuts down a little bit to protect you, and I have very, very sketchy memories, really sketchy memories from probably about 8 weeks afterwards. But there are little standout things, and that little nugget from my dad was definitely a standout thing that I do have my own memory of particular moment and that particular comment from him. And, I remember where I was and I remember how it felt, which is my memory. And I don't have that many of them from that time. But I think just having to accept and just accept that this is something that you can never hope really to fully understand or rationalize. You can't, and you need to stop. You need to stop worrying and stop obsessing and stop thinking about it late at night, and actually just find a bit of peace with it.
I think that's really good advice.
Yeah, I do.
My dad was a very clever man.
Yeah, he's a clever guy.
I'm going to bring us round, Cassie, to our penultimate question or advice sort of slot, if you like, and that is you've talked about actually how lots of people spoke to you and tried to give you advice and things like that, which is obviously very difficult because they had never been in your position. So this one I think is a really important one to ask you, and it's just the advice that you would give to someone who has lost somebody to suicide.
Advice I'd give, I would say be kind to yourself. Give yourself a lot of latitude to find joy wherever you can find it. Start saying yes to things that you might not feel like doing, because you don't really know where that's going to lead or how that might help you. Equally, if you feel strongly about saying no to something, say no. Say no, I don't want to do that. And just remember that actually a lot of people around you probably will want to help. They probably will be completely inept at knowing how to. But actually they will, I think a lot of them, or the good ones, will really appreciate it if you tell them, I'm not very good at asking for what I actually need or want. I don't like to be a burden. I don't like to be any trouble to anybody. That's how I've been brought up. But I did.
Are you sure you're not a man, Cassie? That's how we think. Like, mustn't say anything. Don't want to be a burden to anyone.
Sure, I'm not a bloke. I would prove it to you, but that would be very inappropriate for your podcast.
Nothing wrong with being a man.
There's nothing wrong with being a man. I'm just not one. What was I going to say? No,
sorry,
he's done it again.
I know.
He's done it again. Honestly,
I know where I was.
I shouldn't have a podcast.
I think that one of the things that I think people appreciated in the end when I wrapped my head around was if they would say, what do you need? What do you want? And I kind of go, oh, I don't know. I don't mind, or nothing. I'm okay, or I'm fine. What I actually needed to say and what they needed me to say is, do you know what? I need to cry. I need to go for a walk. Will you come with me for a walk? Will you come around mine and sit on the sofa with a bottle of wine? They needed me to tell them clearly exactly what it was I needed, and I needed to have the confidence to do that. So that's what I would say to someone that was in a similar situation. I would say, don't feel bad about telling people clearly, because actually a lot of them will want to help you, but they just don't know how.
Yeah.
I'm going to come in there. Whilst this episode is targeted at suicide prevention, I think what you've just said is really brilliant advice for men in general with our mental health, and that men learning to be able to say, this is what I need. Men seem to be split into two camps of like emotionally available and intelligent, and men that aren't emotionally available or intelligent. But it's the ones that are emotionally available and intelligent that have learnt to be able to say, in this situation, this is what I need. And I'm certainly not suggesting you can just do that overnight. Anything that is worth learning how to do can take a little bit of practice, and you'll get it wrong a few times. And it can feel, to me, it feels like you see it in sitcoms where people are taking the piss out of how Americans speak when they've been to therapy. Like, when you do this, it makes me feel this, and I would rather that you did this. Like, they break it down into really matter-of-fact language. But what you said about learning how to tell people what support you would benefit from would be a skill for men across the board. If we could learn to do that, that'd be a massive step in the right direction. And since starting the podcast, I've had lots of conversations with various different people, and I'm starting to discover that the burden of male mental health is less unattractive on the people around us than men think it is. I think an awful lot of men have this, again, internalized view. So we just imagine that nobody has got the time, the energy, or the space for our problems, so we'll keep them to ourselves. And what you were just saying there about you in that state of bereavement, actually, you have license to say, I need this. And actually, men, just in day-to-day life, you don't need anything terrible to have happened, but you do still have license to be able to say to the people around you, right now, I need you to be this for me, and whatever it is, a supportive friend. I need you to take me out, get me drunk. I mean, it's not a sustainable coping mechanism, so don't do it forever. But I need you to take me for a night out. I need you to go to the pictures with me. I need you to go for a walk. I need you to sit on the sofa and not talk to me. I don't want to talk. I want you there, but I don't want to talk. That there's nothing wrong with doing that in any scenario. And if men could learn to do that, we'd be making steps in the right direction.
Yeah, I agree. If you sit there and don't talk, Matt, we'll do the final question.
Sorry.
Cassie, you've got
Idiot.
1 minute with 80-year-old you. All right, there, and I'll coin Matt's words for this. She's shuffling in now. You've got 1 minute. Is there anything that you would say, ask, tell, anything you'd like to say? You've got 1 minute with her only, though.
Well, 80-year-old me's not shuffling anywhere. 80-year-old me is probably still down the gym.
Go on.
Nice.
What would I say? I'd say I really hope you're happy. Like, I think that when I'm 80, that's the goal. I want to be 80 years old and looking back at my life with a feeling of satisfaction and fulfillment. And when you've lost someone or you've been through a lot of trauma, I think, and probably more so than maybe than most, you sort of realize that life is, it's the cliche, life's short. You've got no idea when that person's not going to be in your life. You've got no idea when you might not be in your life. And I think that, you know, what I noticed was that I started to say yes a lot more. I started to do things a lot more. My friends will tell you I'm fairly well known for booking random trips here, there, and everywhere. And I think I would want 80-year-old me. I'd like to ask 80-year-old me, are you happy? Do you think that you did everything you wanted to do? And if 80-year-old me says, yeah, actually I did, I'd be good with that. I think the conversation would end there.
Well, I think in the what are we on the 97 minutes we've been talking this evening, and from our brief chat the other day, I think 80-year-old you is going to be lined up to say, yeah, we did good. She's
on that trajectory, isn't she?
Absolutely. So, well, there she goes, cartwheeling out now, not shuffling now, cartwheeling. Wow. We better do some takeaways, Matt, hadn't we? And then wrap this up so everyone can go to bed.
The thing that I would advise people to take away from this episode, well, there are a few things. I'll keep it to two. And they came really close together, actually. The first is that male mental health is a societal responsibility. It's not just men's responsibility. It's not the partners of men's responsibility. It's not the mothers of men's responsibilities or the brothers of men's. It's everyone's responsibility to enable men to be more able to speak. It's not right and it's not fair to say, well, if men can't speak about their mental health, men need to get better at it. So my takeaway would be for anyone listening, and for men listening, I don't mean that everybody else has to look after you. I mean, you have to be part of the solution as well. I mean, you have to look after the men around you. But likewise, you have to look after yourself. So takeaway one is that men's mental health is everybody's responsibility. And I'm going to steal a really good one that I'm sure somebody else is going to have lined up. Take more photographs. I love that as a snippet of advice. Just take more photographs. I think it helps you appreciate all kinds of things. A, to keep memories, and B, to practice gratitude, because you take photographs of the things that bring you joy, or you might take photographs of other things. And I'm stealing from Brad's playbook here as well, that when you start to look for more things that bring you joy, when you start to look for the positives in the world, you see more of them naturally. You just notice them more and more and more. So that would be my second one, to take more photographs. Brad, what were your takeaways?
Yeah, I like that. I like. We've obviously spent quite a lot of time together now. You saying it exactly as I would say it. I think the things that stood out for me in the conversation in terms of the takeaways. The first one that we kind of came to for me that I want people to think about is, in terms of seeking advice, find the right person. And it's one we've talked about before on different shows, but there are lots of different types of therapy, and there are even more different therapists. And so if you have taken that step, that brave step to go and speak to somebody about it, then don't be put off if the first person you speak to, it doesn't feel quite right. We'll use your analogy of like test drive the car. Just go and try a few different people, try a few different approaches, try a few different therapists, and you'll find the one that you will feel, this is the one for me. So that, I think, is a really important one. I also, and I know I picked this up sort of fairly recently in the conversation anyway, but that idea that we can't understand everything. And I think it's just, sometimes it's really important for us to acknowledge, do you know what, in my head, that makes absolutely no sense, but that's okay, because we don't have to understand everything. And then just to finish on a positive one, you said about enjoying the journey. And again, tying into Matt's last comment, whatever people have been through in life, there are still positives that we can find. We might have to look really hard for them sometimes, but they are there. So yeah, enjoy the journey. You said it yourself at the end. Life is short, so we might as well enjoy it while we're here. So they're my three, and I'll stick with that.
Brad. Cassie, were there any that jumped out at you?
I don't know. I think that my probably if I wanted anyone to take away anything from this, who has ended up in a similar situation, whether it doesn't have to be exactly the same, but it is. I think it is to be patient with yourself, be kind with yourself, be kind to yourself, give yourself a break. You'll have very strange ups and downs. There's nothing linear about the process, and it's an absolute roller coaster quite a lot of the time. But it does, after a time, if you work hard at it and you take the positives out of your life and you take the support where you can, peace does come, and it does. You don't leave it behind, and you don't get over it, but you find peace with it, and you can sit with it, and then the rest of life begins to get a little bit more colour back in it, and just focus on the colour.
That I think that's so good to hear, Cassie, that the way you've described it, because I think in today's really sort of high speed world, people like clear cut answers and polarized opinions, and what you're saying is, no, it's not terrible forever. No, it's not. You never think about it, and it's gone. What you're saying is that middle ground of it's still there, but you learn to live with it and live a full and fulfilled life. But it's still there, but you still get to live a full and fulfilled life, despite the fact that it's still there in your life.
Yeah. And there's nothing bad about that.
No. Cassie, this is the point at which Brad and I would normally say thank you. And I don't quite know how to say thank you enough for the conversation that we've had this evening. This is by far and away the most important mental health takeaways episode that we've recorded so far. Our hope really is, because as I've said in previous episodes, Brad and I aren't getting rich off of this. We're actually really genuinely trying to help people. And our hope is that this episode and your perspective in particular serves as some sort of tool to help people in the future. And I can't see anybody hearing what we've discussed tonight and not finding it helpful. So really, really sincerely, thank you ever so much for coming on the show. I really think people are going to find what you've been brave enough to share really, really helpful. So thanks ever so much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Cassie.
Is that the end of a podcast?
What's that, sorry?
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you can say that.
The right thing to say, I don't know. How do you really thank someone for talking to you on a screen? I don't know. If it's to be honest, if it's helpful to one person, it's worth doing. So yeah, thanks, guys.
We're really, really proud of the episode you've just listened to. It's exactly what we set out to create, something that addresses the important subject of male mental health, but we hope we haven't done it in a dry, dull, boring and depressing way. We hope we've done it in a way that you felt like you can engage with. If you've been affected by the main issue raised in today's episode, you'll find a link in the description of this episode where you can find further help and support. Thanks ever so much for listening.